Param Vijayate Sri Krishna Sankirtanam, total world victory of Hare Krishna. My name is Tapapunja Das.
And my name is Dana Devi.
And this is Vaishnava Voices. Welcome to all our viewers tuning in live for the show today and all of those watching in the archives. Many of you not even born yet. Welcome to planet Earth. Shout outs to Mike McNeish, Hare Krishna, Krishnendu's Loving the Countdown, Rajadam, and Srila Prabhupada for the win. Well spotted. Today's show is Farm or Die, food security in the future, and our special guest today is His Grace Tapapunja Prabhu. Thanks for phoning in from the surrounds of New Vrindavan, where we've got the stream live. Hopefully, how'd you go with fixing your microphone there, Prabhu? Have we got sound still?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay now? Is it better?
Fantastic.
Brilliant.
It sounds amazing.
Yeah. Thanks to my dear wife here. Here she is, right here.
Haribol.
Hare Krishna, mother.
Haribol. Hare Krishna.
Haribol.
He's one of the early residents of New Vrindavan, actually, 1972.
Okay. Perhaps you would like to join us for the episode today?
Don't do that.
Yeah. Would you like to join?
I can listen.
She's going to be listening, and she'll
and then
pop in there when she thinks that she has something to say that's revolutionary.
Awesome. Fantastic. That's great. And so, so Prabhu, just so the viewers can know who you are, you mentioned that your wife is one of the really early residents of New Vrindavan, and that's where you're living now. Could you give us like a brief kind of introduction overview of who you are and your history in Krishna consciousness?
Yes, I was. I came to New Vrindavan in 1974 during the Sananyatra festival, having met the devotees originally in about 1968 in Berkeley, California, where I was storming up and down the streets of Berkeley in my romanticized vision of the revolution. Berkeley and San Francisco Bay Area were kind of the epicenter of the what we romanticized as being like the youth revolution in America. It was kind of the epicenter of where you went when you were just not going to take it anymore and were eager to create a youth culture at the time. So it was in that environment. I was living on the streets of Berkeley, was very politically active in both the alternative culture and also the political culture of the times. So in that kind of three-ring circus of counterculture, I saw devotees. They were the only besides the craziness of the anti-war movement and the street people and the Black Panther Party and the evangelical Christians and the whole array of counterculture players, the devotees were the most peaceful. They would come out every day faithfully, 5 or 6 days a week, and just chant Hare Krishna. And we kind of thought, we meaning the street people, that what's up with these people? Like, everybody's got long hair, but they don't have any hair. And how is it that they only know one song, which they would chant wonderfully? I mean, they would do Hari Nam for 5 or 6 hours continuously. And so it's kind of in that environment, social, political environment, that I first saw devotees, first met them. And subsequently, I helped organize a series of rock and roll concerts in one of the major parks in Berkeley, in which on every Sunday, bands from San Francisco and the Bay Area would play. It's kind of what we called at the time a gathering of the tribes. And uncommonly one Sunday, and I was also the MC for that. I would get up and speak and rant and rave about the revolution, and we would invite the Black Panther Party from Oakland to speak, and it was quite an operation in between bands while the bands were setting up and swapping out equipment. And on one Sunday, it was uncommon, but the devotees came into that park, and they were snake dancing through the park. And they came up to the edge of the stage during a timeout for the bands to switch, and they said, "Could we get up and chant on stage?" And I said, "No, I don't think so. This just isn't your venue." But they insisted. Finally, by the grace of Krishna, I said, okay, go ahead. And they got up and they began chanting, and I kind of snuck off into the crowd for the 10 minutes or 15 minutes before the next band was ready. And I had chanted with them previously, but just kind of quietly, because it was a little bit, the crowd that I was hanging with on the street people, it was a little bit kind of strange to chant Hare Krishna openly and joyfully. So I was in a part of the crowd while the bands were switching equipment out, and I began chanting with them vocally. And by the grace of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, something happened to me that was very unusual. And that is, I started crying. And it was like completely bizarre. I wasn't the kind of person to just start crying, right? It wasn't my nature. And upon reflection, years later, I think it was by the grace of Lord Chaitanya, he was saying to me, "You're so intent on this revolution, but I'm going to show you what the real revolution is. It's not just these externals and quoting Chairman Mao and holding political rallies and fighting with the police. And I mean, Berkeley was practically in a state of warfare between the Oakland Induction Center, which is right next to Berkeley, and the various anti-war issues and free speech issues on campus. It was predictably every 10 days there was some kind of warfare going on, violence. So anyway, I wiped the tears out of my eyes, and I got up on stage, and I continued being the MC. And then not too long after that, I left the whole area because I had been arrested so many times for street activity, various demonstrations. And every time the U.S. government would escalate the war in Vietnam, we would call a rally, and hundreds and hundreds of people would come, and then they would break into three people in a group and race around the city, just trashing anything that was government related or pro-war related. So I think I was arrested like 7 times or something for various, disturbing the peace, criminal trespassing, this and that. And finally, I just decided that I needed to take a break from the revolution. Because when you went inland 10 miles from the bay, which is right on the edge of the ocean, 10 miles inland, everybody was just sitting on their porch, drinking beer and watching baseball games. It's kind of like, what revolution? So kind of in our passion, our youthful passion to create a youth culture in which we were hoping to change the world, there was a lot of I think romanticizing about being a revolutionary. And at that time, of course, the real revolutionaries who were fighting against the American war machine, the Cubans and the Vietnamese, telling us, and I know this because I was in direct contact with people who were speaking with them, that you cannot do there what we've done here in Cuba or in Vietnam, because we had the support of the people in the countryside. You don't have that. You have to create a mass movement in the city. And it's not going to be based upon guerrilla warfare. It's going to be based upon a change of heart. And again, on reflection of those times, that's almost 60 years ago, 50 years ago, it falls right in line with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's instruction that what we're really about is a cultural movement. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't be trained to protect ourselves and also be prepared to administer justice when justice is needed. But generally, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement is chanting, dancing, feasting, spreading the holy name. So I left that environment. I went back to the state that I was from in Michigan. A friend of mine gave me 6 acres of land to use. I began growing a garden and didn't have anything materially. I had no money but a truck and some farm tools. And one day a young man from the Detroit Temple, this is kind of a remote area as well, he kind of wandered onto the property and asked if he could stay there for some time. And as it turns out, he had blooped from the Detroit Temple. He was not able to control his quest for intoxication. So I said, yeah, you can stay here, but I need help. I'm seriously growing food to help supply my friends in Detroit and Ann Arbor, but you have to help me. So he wasn't much help, but he was living evidence that even a blooped bhakta who had a basic grip on the philosophy and a lot of compassion in his heart could explain Krishna consciousness even to a hardcore idiot like myself, who was just focused on, living the good life on the land and fighting in the revolution from that perspective, or from that vantage point. So he very compassionately, we would sit we had no electricity, no running water, but we would sit at night and he would read Krishna book to me. And finally he convinced me, he said, go to the temple. Let's hitchhike into Detroit, go to the Detroit Temple for the Sunday feast. So I did that. I went with him, which was quite if you know the city of Detroit, it's kind of life-threatening to hitchhike through Detroit. Very dangerous city. It's a very kind of a hardcore, blue-collar, racially segregated city. And anyway, when I went to the temple in Detroit, the contrast between my crazy hippie life of, living on the land and rarely bathing and not really understanding much about what I was doing, except I was good at farming, but compared to the sublime nature of the temple, the cleanliness of the temple and the kindness of the devotees, the beauty of the deities, and the philosophy itself just swept me away. And I think I went one more time and then I just moved in. So that this is the revolution that I'm looking for. So that earlier experience of Agyata Sukriti, of allowing the devotees to chant at a gathering of the tribes in Berkeley, California, and the fact that when I actually began chanting myself, it brought tears to my eyes. I kind of connected those issues, that this is God in the heart, what they call, at the time I didn't know, but what they call Krishna, showing me that this is what he wants me to do. So I moved in and I helped around the temple, and because I was kind of street savvy, they had me on book distribution in Toledo, Ohio, with incense at stoplights, passing out magazines and like that within about 2 days of living in the temple. That was the spirit of book distribution at the time, that anybody who shows any promise and has a IQ higher than a cucumber, we'll put them on book distribution. So anyway, within about 2 weeks, though, I heard about New Vrindavan in the hills of West Virginia. And I gathered together all my farm tools, and a friend of mine drove me there to New Vrindavan. This is 1974. At that time, Kirtanananda Swami was the leader of the community. And it was in that same year, actually, that we started building the palace. So although I was principally involved in farming and gardening, he found out pretty quickly that I was also good with people on the streets. So I was, within a year or two, I was running temples and our satellite temples around New Vrindavan and managing the men's Sankirtan parties. And that was exciting. There's a whole bunch of stories there, but that was basically the way that I entered into the Association of Devotees.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Prabhu. Today's topic is farm or die. It's about food security in the future. It's been a long-term kind of program of Krishna consciousness. You mentioned Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's program of chanting, dancing, feasting, spreading the chanting of the holy names. And then Srila Prabhupada, of course, famously said that 50% of my work is not done because I haven't yet established the Varnashram Dharma, or the division of human society according to people's natures and the necessary occupations, and also an agrarian economic basis. I would like in the future to do another episode. I'm just going to put this out here now for you to consider. I'd love for you to be involved in that one, about how do I detect deviation in my leaders. That's a whole separate kind of topic that has always fascinated me about New Vrindavan, because I myself joined ISKCON through a preaching center, satellite preaching center, if you will, called The Loft, that was created by His Holiness Deva Amrita Swami. And so there's like a whole kind of lineage there, and I know quite a bit about the history of New Vrindavan. Of course, it's very famous. So that's a whole other topic, and I just want to acknowledge that topic exists and that we're going to talk about that in the future, and I'd love to have you come back to talk about that. But for today, I'd like to focus on the farming, the food security, and the future. So you mentioned that you were on a 5-acre block of land. No, 6 acres. Was it 6 acres?
I don't remember.
Yeah, actually,
6.5 acres.
6.5 acres. Okay, I'm very interested in that because we have a 5-acre block of land, like very practical on the court here. So I'm seeing this, when you said a 6.5 acre, I'm like, I know how big that is. Now, on that 6-acre block of land, you were bathing irregularly, you said. What kind of facilities did you have for living on that land? Was there a cabin there, or where were you staying?
No, there was nothing. This is just a piece of land that was sloped and went down into a wetlands area, and I just pitched a tent. And
Okay.
I had a Studebaker truck, about 40 cents in my pocket, a background in farming. I was raised on a farm in my youth, and a lot of ambition. And part of the hippie culture of the time was that we don't need money. We just need each other. We need to figure out ways and means to barter and trade and develop a loving, trusting culture of young people. And
sounds
one
revolutionary.
One of our mantras was, "Don't trust anybody over 30." And not fully realizing that someday we would be over 30. But anyway, that was a 5-acre property. He didn't give me the deed to the land, but what I did is just began hauling copious amounts of cow manure to it from local farms in the area, and then laying out gardens, and then taking that produce and using it as my barter material. In other words, my currency.
Okay. So you just lived in a tent. You got cow manure from the surrounding farms. Did the farmers themselves? I'm like super practical now because we have a 5-acre block. We've been living in a tent there for a year. So I can totally relate to this. We have dairy farms around us. Our land is a former cow grazing paddock that has a flat part and then slopes down into a stream. So I'm right there with you. Now, did the farmers in the surrounding area, did they put the cow manure together? Because generally the cows just pass manure in the fields, right? Or did you have to go and collect it? How did that happen?
Collecting it in a state like Michigan, which is 6 months of the year is miserably cold, is easy because at that time of year there is no pasture ground, similar to Newfoundland, and therefore the cows are kept in an enclosed area.
I see.
Like an exercise yard.
Silage.
Right, and then the manure is collected throughout the winter, and usually the farmers are happy for you to come and get some because they actually can't deal with it all, depending on the size of the operation.
Yeah. Okay.
But loading it and then unloading it, spreading it on the fields, that's tapasya. Takes a lot. It's a lot of hard work. And generally, that's what I see. One of the challenges in helping people get going on the land is that most of us don't come from backgrounds that require so much physical stamina, and this is equally important, mental discipline. Because farming, growing things and distributing them, and then storing them, and then teaching others how to replicate what you know about it. It's a discipline. You have to be here now. As that bogus yogi Ram Dass wrote a book once. Be here now. So farming is kind of the epitome of be here now, because you have to be willing to go out every day and look at the changing conditions of your fields and what's going right, what's going wrong. You have to continually reprioritize what you're doing because the weather changes, soil conditions change, and it's a lot easier just to get money and go buy food somewhere, but that's not what Prabhupada wanted. He wanted a culture of independently thoughtful devotees who were interdependent on one another, independent but also interdependent. And that is the way in which these farm communities will develop when we start working with each other and sharing our skill sets, whatnot. But it's a great discipline. I mean, there's a reason why Prabhupada said in the light of the Bhagavad that it's the most noble profession. At the end of the day, when you and Donna have done some hard work on that land, I'm quite certain you don't feel really noble. You feel like you need to take a shower, or you need to it's a lot of hard blood, sweat, and tears. So what's the noble part? The noble part is that devotees who farm and then distribute those fruits of their labor for Krishna's pleasure are providing a service to the other varnas and the other ashrams by which they can peacefully go about executing their duty without worrying about the most basic of human needs, eating. So when you're able to do that and you take that on as a challenge, that this will be pleasing to Krishna because I'm allowing the Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas and the Sudras to take up their responsibilities, and I'm providing the fuel, the rocket fuel for them to be able to do this in a way that they're healthy and strong. What a noble profession.
Not many people see it that way. They associate that farming is, being dirty, working with the land and the earth is just a bit of too much. But it's a great work being in dealing with the earth and seeing your hard work coming up. And when you go for me personally, I would say is the most joyous part where you go to the garden and collect your own vegetables that are fresh and they're organic.
Yeah, to do it. I was told once, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but in Peru, there are many levels of growing of things, because from sea level to 14,000 feet, or whatever the highest mountains are there, there's all kinds of growing zones. And that the farmers there, at least in the original tradition of farming there, would not even walk in the field with their shoes on, because they had such respect for Bhumi Dev and understood the sacred nature of their duty, that they would walk just like we walk into the temple without shoes. Is that correct? Is that?
Yeah. In Peru, well, the understanding is, like you mentioned, the earth is a mother. So we call it Pachamama. Pacha means the ground, mother. There is a lot of respect, and also they understand by walking without shoes not only is part of respect, it's also connecting with Mother Earth. Because like Mother Earth bring us to this life, and then we're gonna go back to Mother Earth. We're gonna be like becoming a compost anyways. So the understanding of it, you see.
Right.
The other thing in Peru, I lived there for 3 years in the ISKCON temples there, and did the BBT, and studied the place while I was there. Prior to the Spanish coming with the Incas, they the farmers would give 50% of their crop to the Inca, and it would be offered in the Temple of the Sun. 25% of it gets redistributed, and then the other 25% goes into these grain stores in various parts of the kingdom to be redistributed in times of famine. So they had a very might say feudal, or kind of close to Varnashram system there, of like taxation and redistribution by the government.
Right. Wonderful.
Yeah, the sacrifice that was done for the Inti, which is the sun god. They have in the Inca culture, we have the understanding, which is very similar to the Vedic one. The sun is a god, it's a person, it's a demigod. And the offerings that you do is like the prasadam offering, you see. Right. Without the sun, we don't have any of those. Without the earth, we don't have any of this. Right. And without the moon, we don't have the nourishment of what we have now. Without the air, because we have the understanding that the air is a god. It's giving us life. The sun is a god. The moon is a god. The earth is a god. The water is a god, you see. It's a mother. Yaku mama, we call it Yaku, meaning water, mama, mother. Mm-hmm. So we have everything connected, quite similar to the Vedic culture, and how they offer everything, their consciousness and their respect for these demigods.
Right.
And they were excellent in astronomy, excellent in astrology. They, for example, my grandmother used to look in the sky at it, as a little kid that I couldn't understand exactly, because she says, you see that star over there? And you see what's happening there? This year, we're not going to have a good harvest. Wow. And I couldn't understand because, there are millions of stars. There's like, what is she looking at? It's like, okay, I could not. And she said, you will understand, you will learn more the more I tell you about this, because I was growing, right. And she was teaching me all of that. Right. And even the predictions for the future, she used to say all about this. She used to predict about, this man will come and sleep with many women, and women will be corrupted, and diseases will come out of this, and so on. So she predict all of those, and she used to instruct me about all of those things. According to that, and only by looking the stars and everything, and her love and respect for God, although she didn't see God, she's always every morning. At the same time, every morning she was out and saying, thank you, God, for that, what I'm alive today. Thank you for what you done last night. In the evening, she says, thank you for today, what I have today, what happened. She had a communication like she's talking to no one because there's no one there, but she's talking like she's talking to a person. like that communication between two persons. And I don't know, and I used to hear all of her conversations in the morning, because I hear her getting up in the morning and saying the first thing in the morning, opening the door, she say, "Thank you, God."
Oh, wonderful.
It's incredible. And unfortunately, right now in Peru, it's, when their westernized civilization gets in there, and then they become corrupted with the way of thinking and the culture, and the people are losing that culture.
Right.
There's very, very prominent and strong culture, which is the Inca culture. Quite unfortunate.
Can I ask a question? What is your understanding of, we hear in Krishna book that Mahadanava was basically exiled. His life was saved from the forest fire. I'm a little rusty on my past time, but basically in the Krishna book, Mahadanava was saved from devastating forest fire. And part of his arrangement with Krishna was he was exiled, and that the culture that you're describing, the Inca culture, the Mayan culture, like that, and I'm sure there are differences between the two, but was the result of his presence in South America. Is that, do you know anything about that?
I don't find I haven't read about that. I read a lot of Krishna books, but I never connected it. So I will look into that. But I will not be surprised, because, if you read the books about the Inca culture, and right now in there are different cathedrals or temples there, the Incas constructed there or built. Also in Machu Picchu, and also in Sacsayhuaman, there's where my city is, just above in the hill. There is kind of like entrances through the rocks, like a caves, that according to history, that takes you right underground, that no one can go in, only special people can go there. Wow. And there's this talk about the connection between the Egyptians and the Incas, and how there is a way underground to get in there. And I was reading the book of Bhaktitirtha Swami in the leadership books.
Right.
There he mentions about living entities that live underground in the middle of the earth, and how they are in communication with different cultures and people and so and so. And I start thinking, what is the connection between these ones? Because the Incas weren't any ordinary people, because right now even anthropologists and all of these scientific people, they cannot even find how all of these buildings of the Incas has been built. Everything to perfection. No one can find that.
Right.
No one. They're just very puzzled. And for me, it's like, the demigods have a better strategy, like engineers, the knowledge is higher than a human being. And the Incas, because they have the Incas didn't have language. Everything was transmitted through the spoken. Everything they tell you, they maintain as it is, and they transfer it to different, let's say, cities, only by the spoken message.
So they didn't have writing, is what you're saying?
No, they didn't have writing.
Right.
So in the Vedic culture, people were highly, highly intelligent, and their memory was so intact that you say something to them, and then they knew the message and carry on.
Right.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
When I was there and looked at it, I was mostly in the city, Lima, which in the guidebooks it says everybody tries to get out of Lima as fast as they can. It's a city built for 120,000 with 12 million people living in it.
Right.
Yeah, but I did get up into the mountains and into the jungle on a few trips, distributing books or doing preaching programs. And I read a book about the conquest of Peru, and I saw two things. The first one was that this is the Vedic culture. Like, this is like a literal, I'm looking at what it looks like. And then the second thing was, this also looks like it was another conquest prior to the conquest of the Spanish. And even, the traditional greeting in Quechua, what is it?
Am I making Kashinki?
No, it's like, don't lie, don't steal.
No, there's 3 principles.
Yeah.
The Incas have 3 principles they rule with. Amaluya, don't be a liar. Amakela, don't be a lazy one. Amasua,
Don't steal.
don't be a thief. Three principles. The understanding for that is there is no need for you to be lazy because you have your hands, you have your head, you have your legs, you have everything that God gave you, and you must utilize it. Otherwise, what is the point for you to be in this earth? Yeah. And don't be a thief. People are working and you are going and stealing is a big punishment because you have everything that you need and you can make your own. And why you go into your neighbor that is working hard with sweat and pain and you just go in and stealing that, you done. What's the Amakela?
No lying.
Don't be a liar. Why do you need to lie? That is a big punishment for being a liar. You be truthful. There's nothing else but to be truthful to anything and whatever you're doing in life.
And this is supposedly a primitive civilization, you know. But if you have a look at society today, it's like not even on that level. Like, but this was like ingrained, and they repeated it over and over again because they were like, okay, if we put these 3 principles in practice in this society, then the whole thing's going to function. And, you know, you can hear some of the other things there. They're very much connected to the agrarian economic basis. They're very connected to the divinity and the kind of clockwork machinery of the universe, and that has a creator and an intelligent design. And then they live in harmony with that. So I'm very blessed because for this next phase of my life, Krishna has given me the perfect wife for this. I spent the first half of it as an urban inner city preacher and now living in a tent on a 5-acre block of land with 4 cows. And it's like...
And 30 chickens.
And 30 chickens and 2 cats. And then when I hear you say you go to a 6-acre block of land and start like farming on there, I'm like, for sure he must have grown up on a farm. He didn't come off the streets of Oakland to a 6-acre block of land in a tent and do that, because I know what that looks like. So Krishna obviously prepared you with your farming background for it.
Were you the tent that you're living in? Did the cows live in there too, or?
No, they destroy it.
Yeah, they would like to.
They blessed with a little bit of a cow dung around. They're awesome at it. They're so clever. Those animals are incredibly clever.
So what is your production plan? And I say that because what I've learned over the years is don't expand so you can maintain. Don't try to do something huge and then it turns into a weed patch because you can't maintain it. What are you doing? What are you doing? Are you actively growing a garden or?
Well, I was trying until the cows just got in there, ate all my plants. But this is for this time. We are doing some gardening. We just need to be.
I put an electrified fence around the garden now because they broke through anything else.
That's so clever.
And they just got in there and ate it. They would just watch us in there. And then the other thing that they do is if they can get in there, if we're in there and we leave the gate open, one of them will come in and then run around inside because they want us to chase them in there. They're like super playful, but very mischievous.
Oh, very.
So, I to your point about not trying to do too much or all the things at once, one of the things that we did at the beginning that if we were to do it again, I would be strongly advocating for doing it in stages, is getting chickens, cows, and a garden all at the same time. And those animals and that those all require different types of fencing. Right. Like, if you want to fence your garden to protect it from chickens, it's one type of fence, but cows can smash that fence. So you put a cow-proof fence up, but chickens can get through it. So now you need to put up a chicken and a cow-proof fence, and you need to do them both at the same time, or neither of them will work, and they'll both get destroyed. So we kind of really complicated things right out of the gate.
I asked that question because I've been invited. Done a lot of consultation with devotees starting little farm projects. And this is going to sound heretical that I say this, but please give me a chance to explain before you cut me off.
Okay.
Yeah, go
heretical.
ahead.
Yeah, I'm here for it.
What I told them, I said is, look, first thing to do is stabilize your food supply and develop a rural economy that's working for you, so you don't have to just drop the whole thing and go find a job somewhere to support it. So what you don't want to do, I would tell them, is don't start with a cow. Starting with a cow is like learning to ride a bicycle by teaching a child to ride a bicycle by putting him on a Harley Davidson motorcycle. Because what happens is that the care of the cow is so demanding. You know, the feeding, the grazing area, the fencing, all the things that make cow protection and the care of a cow part of your family, that you'll never get around to the farm. You'll never be able to successfully grow a crop that is, as I said earlier, is your currency. In other words, that's the medium of exchange that you have to start becoming relevant to the devotee community that's close to you, or even the non-devotee community of your neighbors, all of whom I assure you like healthy organic produce. So yeah, that's an awkward situation to be in, I know. And usually they wouldn't do that. They'd get a cow or a couple of oxen immediately, as if that was like, now we're really Vedic, you know. And
Yeah, I get it. It's the goal.
It always turned into a disaster. And I was kind of like, I told you this is going to happen. So I hope I'm not sounding mundane, but what I've learned from the whole thing was that grow into the need for a cow, because obviously the manure is your source of fertility. And in light of that, I wrote an essay years ago called "The Stepping Stones to Real Cow Protection: Separating the Rhetoric from the Reality."
Mm.
And anyway, if you'd like, someday I'll send that to you.
Where is that? Is that published somewhere now?
It's just in my, my Word file, but I could send it to you online.
Oh, I'd love. Awesome. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. That would be very useful.
It's a little bit dated, but it's still the points I make in it is that the one of the major points I make in it is that we have to learn how to see Krishna on the land by seeing all of the, as Donna was mentioning about the Incan culture, seeing all of these gifts in front of us. And it's hard to do that when you're overwhelmed with economic issues. You know, you got to keep the car running or do this or that. So you're constantly leaving the land to solve problems with money, which sometimes you have to do that. When I went to New Taliban, ISKCON New Taliban, I had absolutely no support. I had nobody was paying me anything. There was, it was a huge financial burden just to move all my farm equipment down there. So I had to begin 3 days a week, sometimes 4 days a week, to do farmer markets, where the produce that I was growing with the woofer help, and I would take the woofers with me as well, was my source of income, and that was it. I had to do it, but it turned into wonderful preaching because I worked my table, my display of vegetables like a book distributor in O'Hare Airport in Chicago. Nobody walked by my table without me talking to them or saying something or, somehow engaging them. And the produce was beautiful. It was gorgeous. But there was an economic reality to it that I had to recognize, because no one was giving me any money to do that, even though it was a devotee making program. It was bringing new life into New Taliban, which is had become over the years sort of a dead zone. The same 10 people at the Sunday feast every Sunday, same people. But they didn't have money. Everybody, the grihastas who live in New Taliban, they work at Walmart, they drive truck, they do something outside. In other words, creating a land-based economy takes time to do. But once you establish your pattern of being able to successfully, predictably grow things and distribute them, that's the beginning of it.
Okay. Yeah, I can see, this has been in the 25 years that I've been involved in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, this has been like the perennial problem of like, why go to all the trouble of keeping a cow at home if milk is freely available in the market, applied to, produce from the land, for example. When you've got these kind of monocrop industrialized agriculture and you can go to the shop and buy it, and then you can get a job that pays you this money that allows you to buy that stuff, why would you get up every day and go out and collect cow dung from the ground and, do all the things to grow it when you can just buy it? However, the calculus is changing right now. You got like rapidly rising inflation,
right,
where you go into the supermarket to buy, the ingredients for a meal and it costs you like a week's wages. I'm exaggerating, but only slightly.
Yeah.
And and there are chronic critical shortages. And the situation seems, to those who are looking at it with a sober view, to be headed in the direction where that's just going to accelerate and deepen. So as you say, it takes time to establish that pattern, and the time to do that is now for those who are forward thinking enough to see what's coming.
Right. And the other thing is that you learn a certain vernacular and vocabulary about your operation, your farming, that as you go out to preach and as you meet people, attracts them to come back and help you. So central to farming is, in other words, farming, just subsistence farming like you're doing right now, is pretty dry until without preaching. There has to be preaching as well. And all of a sudden you find, oh my God, and I'm sure you already know this, but there's all kinds of young people that want to learn. So I had the advantage of, living and helping build the early New Vrindavan before the palace was even there. In fact, the palace itself changed the whole paradigm. When I came to New Vrindavan in 1974, the biggest department of activity that contained the most number of devotees was the garden. Because New Vrindavan was, excuse the expression, but it was the funny farm for North American ISKCON. It's where you sent the crazies, the lazies, the people who were not book distributors, couldn't lead a kirtan, fell asleep in class, were ridiculously mischievous in the temple, or whatever it was. They would give them a one-way bus ticket to Wheeling, West Virginia, to New Vrindavan. And I'd have these crews of 10, 12 people that were like, I was like the bouncer, the psychiatrist, the gardener, and the maintenance guy. I used to go to Kirtan Ananda Swami and say, I actually just like to work hard on the farm. I don't need all these other engagements where I'm walking around with a clipboard trying to figure out what 15 other people are doing. And he'd tell me, it's your karma. Just work with it. Anyway, what changed that whole paradigm from the biggest department being farm related, large gardens, we had oxen working, we had horses, we had mules, was the palace. And the effort to build that palace for Prabhupada's pleasure. Because of the first year that the palace opened to the public was September 24th, 1979, where we actually opened the doors. Between September of 79 and September of 1980, 100,000 people visited, and mostly Americans.
Wow.
Plus that. I wish Mahabuddhi was on the call because he was very central to organizing that. But all of a sudden, that was it. Forget farming. We've got preaching to do, and we're hosting 100,000 people coming here. Thus, that necessitated, where are they all going to stay? Well, we better build a lodge. Well, where's the money for that going to come from? Well, we got to go out and race around public events, football games and rock and roll concerts, collecting the money to build the facility we need to preach. So from that perspective, it was a smashing success, because I think we've within about 10 years, we had 3 million people visited and saw Prabhupada. And many of them would line up to come in the front door of the palace, and they'd have this kind of worried look on their face, like, oh, I don't know about this. I've heard different things about the Hare Krishnas. When they came out the exit door, they were smiling and they had a book in their hand. Perfection, small book, usually Perfection of Yoga or something. So from a preaching perspective, it was a smashing success, but it completely stymied and stopped the farming operation. The culture of getting together with other people who had that ability to work with the land and to grow things was completely sidelined and put on the back burner. And it was always, oh, we'll get to it later. First we've got to maximize facility for all the guests that are coming. So like that, when Prabhupada said that the second half, my only lament is that I have not established Varnashram, and I want to go to Gita Nagari, and I want to sit down and show the devotees how to live with the land, on the land, with the land. Unfortunately, within the greater family of devotees, of which ISKCON is what the three of us know the best, that instruction, or that lamentation of Prabhupada and the fulfillment of easing his lamentation is misunderstood. Most devotees think that when Prabhupada said he wants us to live on the farm and get into land-based Krishna conscious culture, that it's an additional thing, that the second half is just something you add on. No, that's not the case. The case is it's the second half of his movement, by which the first half can never be complete. So that, as one devotee said, society in general is like a body without a head. But ISKCON society is like a head without a body. Everything's cerebral. It's got nothing to do with, and it's very unfortunate, because the preaching opportunities that avail themselves by example-based teaching on the land is exactly what attracts the Western people. They could care less about deity worship. You get a rare person who understands it because they've evolved from previous lifetimes, and they get it right away. They understand what is the Archa Vigraha, and I don't in any way mean to minimize that. But the fact is, most Western people, they want to know about environmental issues. Why is cow protection important? They think that we're just weirdos, that we have a weird fascination with cows, and it's some
I was going to say fetish,
right? That it's some weird
cows.
voodoo thing that they got about cows, and it's some weird artifact left over, residual from an ancient time. No, it's not. That's not the case at all. So how do you articulate that to people within the mosaic of your neighborhood? Whoever lives around you, is there a way to explain that to them in a way that attracts them, and by which they therefore want to share their skill sets to help you on your farm?
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'm very practical and selfish. I know you said that, you've seen this scenario play out many times. People get enthusiastic, they want to start something, and then they go too big too soon. And from my own experience over the last year, we're dealing with a lot of that, like I said about the chickens and the cows and the fencing. And as you said, the main thing in the beginning, what I'm hearing from you is to get the production of the garden happening to the point where you have enough for yourself and then more so that you can use that to exchange with others in the area and then to build from there. Now, one saying I have is, if you bite off more than you can chew, then you just have to chew harder. So given that we've got 30 chickens, 4 cows, and trying to get the garden off the ground, like, give us the next set of steps so we can just ram them all together, because we're going to have to do a few of them in parallel, I think. And you want to say something more to that?
Yeah. I think the where we got ourselves is like when I moved to the land, Isabella, my daughter, our daughter, she participated and she did some sort of a volunteering kind of work or help for WUHA or HUHA, that is a volunteering animal protection place organization. And she was quite eager to do that. So we found chickens that they were giving away. The lady was in pain to give away her chickens because she was moving to a different part of the country and she didn't want to take all of them. So we decided, like, okay, these animals need some place. We have the big land, they can live there happily. Let's get them. So I encouraged her to continue with this animal protection, and we got the chickens. And after that, we were together, and then came these farmers, I think it's in springtime where the cows are having a lot of babies. And what they do, some of the babies go to the slaughterhouse. And there was this thing, we noticed that this farmer was saying, please take these cows because we don't want to send them to the slaughterhouse. So what we did is, like, we cannot allow that. Let's do it now. We have the land, and whatever happens from there, we will move forward. And that's why we got the cows. And painful to see those animals going to the slaughterhouse. If I had bigger land, I could get all of them. But unfortunately, we don't. And then we have a previous cat from our first cat, and then we got another cat. So there's 2 cats, and they're wild. They can eat whatever rabbits, whatever it's in the land.
Right.
So
that's how we end up with the animals.
That's how we ended up with them. Yeah, a couple of things. With the chickens, they lay eggs. We don't eat eggs, so we've been trading the eggs with neighbors for milk from their cows.
Uh-huh.
Oh,
so we give them 12 eggs, and they give us 10 liters of milk, and then we make curd and sweet rice. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing is about how we ended up here. It's like I'm more kind of like analytical and like would like plan something like this out, especially coming from the city. I'm like super conservative, and let me be straight and honest about it, scared about the whole thing, because I'm like, it's a whole unknown kind of realm for me. I was freaking out. I was like, like, we're getting these cows. This is like a lifetime commitment. And like, we can never give these cows, unless we can find another devotee who's doing the same thing. Like, this is like, we're locked in here. But, however we got here is we're here, and I woke up this morning. I don't know where I was yesterday. I could have been in another body in another universe, but Krishna put me in this body, and I woke up in it this morning. And, this is the situation that I got in front of me. The 5 acres, the 30 chickens, the 4 cows, and the 2 cats, and the garden under construction. Tapapunja, help me. What do I do? What do we do?
That happens with guys that live in the cities, like city life, For me, it's like, we have the land because...
She's like, I know what I'm doing. I'm like, I've got no idea.
Me, it's like, I live in a land where basically that's a luxury from a childhood that I remember. We have the land. My grandmother worked in that. We walk few steps. We have a mangoes. We go to the trees. We get the best mangoes. We're eating on the trees, Or we have bananas there, fresh bananas. We go and pick the bananas, oranges, mandarins. So that is the life that I had. It's luxurious. And the tropical plants, orchids, everything that here is like orchids are so expensive. Like, I had that in my garden, you know. It's like I have everything in my where I grew up before with my grandmother.
Right.
And having a land is like, this is luxury for me because no one can tell me what I do with the land. I can grow my own garden, my vegetables, whatever I want. For me, it's like luxury. It's freedom. It's a space. I love a space. I love the greenery. It's a new world. It's an amazing world living like that. And having chickens, they're chickens. They can live their life, you know. You just give them some food, just pick the greens and eat bugs or whatever. And the cows are cows. They can, for some time, we have to give them milk and so and so. There is a sacrifice that I have no problem because, you know, I love baby animals and animals in general. And at some point they will be going to the green, you know, eating their own grass, leave them, just give them water, a few things in there, like vitamins or the salt for them to lick, or what's the other one? The kind of sugary thing, molasses, I think it's called molasses.
Yeah.
You know, a few things, and then they can live with that. So it's like, nah. And they have their own lives to live as well. So just give them some freedom and space. So there is a different mentality for me, but he's just like, oh my God, what I do is like, just chill out. Krishna is here. Krishna will take care of everything. Few things we don't know. We don't doing it right now, but we will do it, and then things will happen. Just chill out.
Yeah. Okay. So
yeah, but that's not
picture.
easy. That's not easy for someone who has a Kshatriya nature. So what I would humbly suggest is that Sitapati needs to figure out what's the preaching angle here. In other words, it's magnanimous that you've taken on this burden of taking care of these animals on a 5-acre piece of property, and to give preaching life to it will be satisfying, I think, for both of you. You know, in other words, the mechanics of how you make that whole thing work may not be apparent right now, but when you start reaching out to other people and describing and defining your operation for what it is, that we've made this bold move onto a 5-acre property with the intent to protect the creation and to protect the integral part of that creation. Please come and see what we're doing. And I think what you'll see will happen, because this has been my experience, is conventional wisdom in the organic growing world is don't grow it if you don't have a market for it. Now, if you can't figure out where you're going to sell it, don't even grow it, because you just end up with a bunch of produce that you don't know what to do with. And my mood was always, I don't believe that. I'm going to grow it, and then I'm going to figure out how to distribute it and how to make social capital out of it, and how to make thus intellectual capital out of it. Could I tell you a story in that regard?
Yeah.
Sure.
Excuse me. When I started a 501c3 in 1998 called the Small Farm Training Center. And originally I just called it New Vrindavan Organic Gardens. And I was going into town and meeting with people. And because New Vrindavan had such a tarnished legal history, I quickly found out that wasn't a real good idea to call it New Vrindavan Organic Gardens. So it went through a few different name changes until the name I gave to it was all about the function of it. Small Farm Training Center. And because of the nature of ISKCON management, and New Vrindavan in particular, the huge numbers of, especially, Indian guests who are coming, what I found was that no matter what I grew, and I was growing a lot, the temple would only use about 10 to 15% of it, maybe, because there was a rotating door of new manager, new kitchen help, this constantly, and I'd have to go in and reinvent myself every 2 to 3 weeks. You know, hey, I'm the guy that always comes in here with dirty clothes on, but it's because I'm growing food up on the hill up here. And so eventually I started going into town with most of my produce, because honestly, the temple just would not use that much of it. They wanted things that were out of season to satisfy the Indian guests. They wanted cauliflower, broccoli, things that were very difficult to grow out of season or impossible. But what I found was that when I began reaching out with that boga and going into the soup kitchens, the food pantries, the government housing projects, which in America they call Section 8 housing, which is subsidized government housing, and sharing that with people and then inviting them to workshops and whatnot, things begin clicking. And I did that for 8 consecutive years, where I would take boxes and boxes and boxes of produce into places where people really appreciated it. And in other words, I wasn't trying to do this as a photo op. It wasn't like, oh, look at me, I'm the farmer guy and here's a box of peppers on my shoulder. But I would deliver it in such a regulated way that in the course of 1 year, I maybe have 5 places I was delivering to and 30 separate delivery events at each 5 places. That was 30 times I walked in their back door, to meet the cooks, to say hello to the kitchen help, most of whom were volunteer, and say, hey, I brought you lettuce, or I brought you Swiss chard, or I bought this or that. So what happened, what I started seeing was this pattern of grow it, distribute it, and then teach about how you're doing it and why you're doing it. And people of course would inquire, what's motivating you? We're not paying you to do this. So that social capital eventually caught the attention of private foundations, and those private foundations asked me to write a grant, which basically triggered the local food movement in Wheeling, West Virginia. That original grant. It was entitled "Bringing Our Food Dollar Back Home." So essentially, I was working with, in due course of time, academics, clerical people from churches, social service agencies, local news media, city government, and just ordinary people who were interested in a backyard garden. So what started out as just, okay, if you don't want to use all the produce that I'm growing, I'll take it into town where they really appreciate it, grew into the very basis for teaching workshops and expanding the operation to include woofers and other people, because I needed help. I obviously couldn't do it all myself. So my point is that the synergy between preaching and defining your operation in a way that attracts people, because of you're doing what Prabhupada did, which was that he took a big chance by coming to America. He made himself vulnerable to failure. And in that vulnerable position, Krishna helps. And that was my experience too, is that I tried to do something way beyond what I could physically do just as one person with some knowledge and some equipment. And I'll give another example. I created, across from the temple, I created a thing called the Teaching Garden, which was just only a 1/4 acre, but it was manicured. It was beautiful. 50 raised beds. And I'd invite devotee grihastas to come and have a bed of their own, and became a destination for the many, many people visiting New Vrindavan. And one day I was going past it, and there were 8 people inside that garden. And I stopped, I gave them a tour, and I mentioned to them that this is nice. It's a beautiful little garden, but it's not big enough to stabilize the food supply for the core community of about 100 people who live in the ashram and the adjacent apartment buildings near the temple. About 100 people, men, women, and children. But I said that I do have another piece of property just above here, a 10-minute walk from here, but I can't do anything with it because the deer are so bad. There's so many, there's 100 deer per square mile in New Vrindavan. So one of the people in that listening as part of the tour, he said, well, what do you need? I said, I need a fence. I need an 8-foot physical barrier to stop. Deer can jump 6 feet. I said, I need something. I need the Berlin Wall around 6.5 acres. And then he said the magic word, which was how much? And having done a lot of preaching in, especially in Indian homes, these were all Indian people, I knew, don't hesitate. Don't say, oh, I don't know. I'll get back to you in an email. But I immediately said $8,000. And I don't know where I mean, just completely super souls telling me, hey, dummy, say 8,000, you know. So I said 8,000, as if I knew what I was talking about. Anyway, they left. They thanked me for the tour. They left. He came back an hour later and wrote me a check for $8,000. And that became the reason why we created this amazing growing oasis called the Garden of Seven Gates, which was not just a production field. It was a settlement designed to be, the vision for it is that it's a settlement for the future of agriculture within walking distance of the temple. Of course, as ISKCON is famous for, they ruined it eventually. They basically, after it became successful, they took it away and they ran it into the ground. So now it's just kind of an empty field again. But anyway,
there you go.
That's how things can snowball into something really amazing from the most humble beginnings.
Yeah, a couple of practical questions from that. Shout outs to Tom Adams, Tamal Krishna, Darcy says, awesome chat, guys, thanks. And my boy Sam Henson is tuned in from Australia. Shout outs. You mentioned that, hey, there's not enough growing here to stabilize the food production for 100 people. What's your back of the napkin calculations for amount of land, food production, crop types per people? Like, you know, how much, you know, we got a 5-acre land, but we've also got 4 cows that need to graze. And so some of that can go to food production. Like, how much goes to food production? How much of what do we need to grow? If we wanted to be completely, let's say, self-sufficient, or not buying anything from the supermarket and just eating ourselves personally from the land and then overproducing in order to distribute, like, what would that look like? How would we figure that out?
You would figure it out by, first you have to understand that if you're going to, you don't have any milk cows, right?
Correct. Not yet. The oldest one is coming up to a year.
Okay. All right. So generally speaking, the formula for having a cow, at least in the terrain that I'm in here, in the, the northern, whatever they call it, the what's that, temperate zone. Maybe it's the same kind of where you are. I don't know the soil types in that, but basically, 1 cow equals 1 acre to support that cow. Generally. And that means corn production or something beyond just grazing. And here, one cow equals 4 acres of grazing, because you've not only do you have to graze them, they're happy and they've got grass to eat, but I don't know what kind of winter you have there. Maybe you don't even have a winter, but you've got to
we
have
a winter, but not compared to you. It'll go down to 1 or 2 degrees, maybe some frost, but there's grass all year round here.
It's
okay.
very rich.
Ground
Our soil, our soil.
It's volcanic soil here.
Well, you're good then. You don't have to worry about it. I'm speaking from a point of view of surviving the winter up here, and that means one cow requires 4 acres of grazing and hay production to store away for their so they have something to eat in the wintertime. But generally, as far as food production goes, about 60% of what you grow has got to be carbon. I mean, you can't eat grass, I know, But if you're going to enrich your soil using cow manure only, you've got to also have carbon to add to it. So you need carbon crops as well. You need to grow things that you can cut down, mix with the cow manure, keep it in a specific place. Now you've got your stash of fertility, and your production, the space that you need for production, in other words, the size of your garden, will expand proportionate to how well you can keep it fertile. In other words, you don't need a giant growing area. That's a big mistake people make. But what you do need is really rich soil and a ongoing paying your debt back every year. In other words, we've taken from the soil by the grace of Krishna, Bhumi Dev. Now we've got to pay our debt back. So, for example, when you look at harvest records in Bengal, India, because of the richness of the soil there, due to generations and generations of applying cow manure to it, their harvest records were 2 or 3 times what they are now, because that was the culture. When the first East India Trading Company invaded India, and they were traversing north, south, east, and west to examine what they were dealing with, in their journals and logs, they would say, "We have walked the length and breadth of this country, and very peaceful people, very kind. Doesn't seem to be much, if any, crime. And it appears to us that the whole economy of this country is based on cows." So you've got, even on that just 5 acres with your animals, you've got the potential for fantastic gardening on a small scale, especially if you don't have a lot of help. And you've got the reason why people should see your farm, your mini farm, as an example that is worthy of support, because you're doing something that's heroic, that other people, more and more people, will begin doing. Because that, as you mentioned in the beginning, that's going to be the future, farm or die. Because and Prabhupada warned us. He said, these supply, say it in these words, but the supply chains that you're currently dependent upon are going to dry up. But not only because of the environmental conditions, but by the design of the demons. That's what they want. They want people to be dependent. They don't want interdependent relationships. So that's the spearhead. That's the tip of the spear of preaching to your neighbors. We're here to learn how to grow food and to help our neighbors. The Krishna conscious part of that will come by osmosis. You don't have to actively browbeat them with philosophy, reincarnation, you're not the body, all that stuff. Because most of them aren't ready for that. That's first, they have to love you, like you, trust you, respect you, and then love you for what you're doing. And the fact that you're struggling to do it and learn how do all the pieces of this puzzle fit together is intriguing to them, and they'll help you. When I had that teaching garden, it was not only a 1/4 acre of beautiful production, but I had a little tool shed there and a driveway, and I have a lot of local people stop and just ask if they could help, because it was right. Is your farm like on a road where people travel by it? And you have a lot of car traffic.
It's at a dead end. It's in a loop. It used to be, the whole area where we are now at one point was owned by a horse breeder. And so we're on a loop called Ladies Mile, and the horses used to run around it.
There's farmers around. So to town is basically 5 minutes drive. It's quite central, so walkable.
But there's no through traffic there.
No. But could become a place where people are like, I want to go to that place.
It's not at all hard to get to, that's for sure. It's just off the main highway.
Mm-hmm.
Right. What's the biggest what's the biggest population center? What's the biggest next town down? Or what?
It's 45
minutes away.
away. Well,
Let me find out what the.
okay. Let's,
But even Hawera is like a. It's like 150,000.
a popular
87,000. So there's an 87,000 person city 45 minutes away.
Right. Okay, so part of your strategy for making the farm a destination where you can meet people, eventually preach Krishna consciousness more directly, is I assure you that if the two of you with your preaching skills and your cooking skills went into that 87,000 people town, you could be doing a cooking class. And I say that based on the fact that I had the blessings of traveling for years with Radhanath Swami, just the two of us as brahmacharis, doing cooking classes all over Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. And we found out pretty early that the best preaching was don't preach. That sounds demoniac, I know. But we learned that making friends with people without getting into their nonsense, without falling into prajalpa, but actually making friends with them over good, healthy vegetarian prasadam was a huge way to do outreach. Gigantic.
Yeah.
It was such a so we'd have cooking classes. Like we get in a town of 87,000 people, you could have one on the north side, the south side, the east side, and the west side of town, a different night of the week, and advertise your farm. And then next comes workshops on the farm. And if you like, I could send you. Like one year, as I was developing the Small Farm Training Center, I was doing 17 workshops. Workshop description, refreshments, which meant prasadam, free lunch, which meant depending on the size of the crowd. Anyway, I could just see this is what Western people want. They want devotee association, but it has to be in a setting that they're comfortable with, that they can relate to. When you bring them into the temple and there's a roaring kirtan going on and people frantically dancing, that's a freak out for them generally. Not everybody. There's some who are evolved and they get it. They see the joy in worshiping Krishna in that form. But you're on a 5-acre piece of land. You want to, how do we shape this so that what we're growing, how we're distributing it, and how we're using that opportunity for preaching is enlivening to us. It's not just hard work, because we see the real harvest is not just the produce, it's the people that you're connecting to. You're bringing them, as Krishna says in Bhagavad-gita, the thing most dear to him is when you bring people to his lotus feet.
Yes.
That's what the teaching garden was. It was a great opportunity to meet people. I used to have a big map of India in the garden and under a gazebo. So it's probably about 70-80% Indian guests. So the first thing I would do is greet them, bring them over, sit them down comfortably, and I'd ask, could you tell me where you're from in India? With this big laminated map of peninsular India, right? And they would go into ecstasy, just describing the village they were from and what their grandfather grew and how their father worked bullock team. And that would lead to talking about how are we going to keep your teenage kids who are now Americanized from falling prey to meat eating, the seduction of what's happening to them in the public school system. What can we do working together to support each other to do that? So I was designing preaching. I was preaching about things that they really needed, that were relevant to their lives, became what I was doing. That's what was enlivening to me, not blasting philosophy, you know. So anyway, you can do the same thing. You can do the exact same thing. Start a cooking class, or if there's a community college or something, do bhajan on campus. Not when I would, as a temple president in many different places around our zone, New Vrindavan, I would tell guys, look, don't go into these small towns, these small Appalachian towns, blasting away with Harinam. Sit down, do bhajan, make a sign that says, chanting for world peace. Put some prashadam down, some books and some incense burning, and watch what happens. People will come up to you and just sit and just listen and begin asking questions. In the big cities, that's different. You know, where there's buses going by and it's noisy and, you know, it's kind of calamitous environment. Then outrageous Harinam in your face is a different.
It's kind of matching the energy, right? Matching. It's like communication is matching the other person's energy.
Exactly. And that's what you learn about when you work with animals, is that you've got to like slow down and actually get into the mode of goodness with them, understand their mood, and gradually gain their trust. Especially if you're working, if you're training oxen. That's what it takes. And it's hard for Western people who are passionate. Good luck. You know, it's really, personally, I couldn't do it. I couldn't work with oxen. I could work with mules and horses. I used to work with Barshan Swami with them, and I kind of was on the same wavelength, but oxen were just too much mode of goodness. And I was like, nah, I can't do this. It's too much. Yeah, people are like that too.
One thing, a couple of points to what you're saying, Prabhu. First, to bring some scriptural support for what you were saying about meeting people where they're at and making friends with them. And that is, I can't remember which book it was in, but Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he was saying, you know, Adal Shraddha Tato Sadhu Sangata Bhajana Kriya. So, you know, it goes from first having faith and then having the association of the devotees, and then you take up some active practice. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur asked the question, well, where do people get the faith from? Where does that come from? And so he says that there's a type of sadhu sangha that precedes Shraddha, because bhakti comes only from bhakti. And just like fire is inherent in a piece of wood, you put a lit piece of wood with an unlit piece of wood and the fire will come out. Similarly, that Shraddha, the bhakti, the faith, comes out when someone comes in contact with someone else. But that sadhu sangha that happens before Shraddha, that's agyata sukriti. That's how devotees go out and create those pious, you know, credits for people, the bhakti sukriti. And then after they get Shraddha, then they look for sadhu sangha. And that was what happened to you at the, you know, the concerts in the park, where you're doing your thing, and then the devotees come by on the Harinam, and then there's an interaction you have with them where they're like, can we chant on the stage? And you're like, hey, this is not your jam, you know? I don't think this is your thing here. And they're like, hey, we really want to do this. And they keep pushing for it like that. And then you're like, okay, you can do it, you know? And it's like, it's a sadhu sangha that you don't even think it's a sadhu sangha. You don't even know what sadhu sangha is. But, you know, yeah, the devotees, they create it. Srila Prabhupada, when he was asked, might have been in Hawaii, could have been Govinda Dasi, I'm not sure exactly where it was, but it was Srila Prabhupada in Bhagavad-gita. You said that to take to this devotional service of Krishna, one has to have performed all of the Vedic sacrifices and have all of these kind of pious credits and everything, but we have never done any of that. And then Srila Prabhupada replied by saying, I've created your pious activities. So I can hear that. It's the devotees of the Lord are even more merciful than the Lord himself. They go out and they give their association to people in this way by making friends with them and meeting them where they're at. And in that way, within that person, the faith awakens, and then the active, their active participation starts from a certain point.
Well said. Well said.
But then this is from Devamrita Swami's Contemporary Urban Preaching Seminar in 2001. You know, there's the 2 train tracks direct and we could call it indirect preaching. And he said that if devotees only do that, then they'll become weak themselves. But if they only do the direct preaching, the four on the floor, you're not the body, give up your nonsense, blasting Harinam kind of thing, then they'll miss out on like a large section of humanity that we could reach. So it's kind of like being able to be conservative at the core and kind of innovative or liberal at the edge, like keeping those two things together.
Yeah, well said.
Sorry.
Well said.
It's an extended purport.
I've been, I helped start the launch pad for the local food movement in Wheeling was New Vrindavan, and specifically the Garden of Seven Gates, because of the connections I was making in town. And eventually I wrote that grant, bringing our food dollar back home. I was meeting people in town in the world of academia and social service agencies. And eventually workshops, inviting people to workshops became the most wonderful way to meet and greet people. And the fruit of that was credibility. And eventually unfortunately, that nonprofit that I wrote the grant for and became part of, we incorporated with a board of directors and the whole incorporation thing. And eventually it kind of ran itself into the ground because there became a professional group of grant writers who dominated. In other words, no longer a grassroots movement. It became white collar people sitting behind laptops all day long.
They sold out. They went mainstream.
Right. They finally realized that since 90% of our income comes from writing grants and appealing to government agencies and private foundations, we just need a bunch of people sitting in the office who do that. And I'd go into the office. I had a desk there where I keep my farming stuff organized, because I was basically a trainer of AmeriCorps volunteers on a 20-acre farm. And I'd hear these conversations and these conference calls, and they were talking to, meaning our staff of fundraisers, we're talking to other fundraisers or organizations, comparing notes and using what we knew as leverage to get more grant money, more grant money, more grant money. And eventually it became, they finally figured out that, well, when you get good at writing these grants, what you really do is you write yourself in a great big fat salary into the grant. And in other words, we're calling it a nonprofit organization, but the actual profit is your salary that you wrote into the grant to do something that's just optics. You're not really growing much food. Eventually that organization defaulted on 3 of the grants. I wrote 2 of them. And they defaulted on them. These are government grants from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the West Virginia Department of Agriculture. They defaulted on 3 of them. And once you do that and your name goes out, your organization
connection issue there. Yeah. I've seen this. It's like, first you're preaching, then you're like, we need to get some money to support the preaching, and then you switch to getting the money, and that becomes the focus, and then the actual core activity is gone and getting the money becomes the thing.
I think that's what's happening right now in ISKCON. It's all about the money.
It changes the pressures and the priorities of the organization. You start off with a product development team, which is a couple of guys in the garage making a cool thing. Then you're like, we made this cool thing, but now we've got to get the cool thing to market and sell the cool thing and get people to buy the cool thing. So now you build a marketing and a sales organization around the thing that you built.
Yeah.
He'll come back if he can.
Yeah.
You build a marketing and a sales organization around the cool thing. And then suddenly the company becomes all about marketing and sales. And the cool thing is really like, and then it's marketing driven rather than product driven. And, you know, eventually the whole thing loses all of its flavor. The original founders, you know, they leave. They're like, this is not about making cool things anymore. This is just about making money. Because most of the people in the organization now are oriented around making the money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that kind of came out in the those organizational pressures around the River of Freedom, you know, the New Zealand Parliament protests,
Right.
that whole time period. And so that's one of the things that we have to always be vigilant about as we're doing this project. Because it's like, okay, you do the thing, and then you can get some money from the government for doing the thing. Now suddenly you're a government employee.
Exactly.
And you rely on the money, and then the government tells you that, well, we want you to do something that actually contravenes one of your core values or deviate, because now you're working for us.
Yeah, exactly.
We want you to get rid of all of the Gurukul teachers who won't take the jab and start teaching the kids about gender fluidity. It's like, okay, what are you going to do, you know? So you got to stay underground.
Yeah.
And not sell out and go mainstream.
The other thing that I wanted to ask Tapapunja Prabhu, it's about, you know, at some point he mentioned he was doing all of these projects, and there was another land close to the temple that he was producing, and it was going well. And then ISKCON took over, and now it's like basically grass paddock.
Well, when he says,
I want to ask about that, like to clarify what exactly happened, because
when he says ISKCON took over, he means a particular manager, because there's no ISKCON that you can grab their throat and strangle it. That doesn't exist. You know, like someone could grab my throat and strangle it because I'm like a person, you know, but ISKCON is not a person. ISKCON is a concept. It's like a, you know, Muchakunda's got ISKCON member of ISKCON in his bio on Facebook, you know. People say to me like, are you ISKCON? Are you an ISKCON devotee? Are you in ISKCON? I'm like, well, it depends on who you ask. And since you're asking me, the answer is yes. But you could ask other people, right? And they would say no. Or they might go as far as saying, you know, releasing a newspaper article saying these following people do not represent ISKCON Auckland. You know, I'm famous for that. So when it's a linguistic device to say ISKCON took it over, it means a particular manager in ISKCON who managed it in a particular way. I'm always very cautious and careful about my language with that, because once you get into this idea that ISKCON is a monolithic thing, you lose all your power to interact with it. You know, it's like, okay, this particular manager in ISKCON thinks this way and does this thing, but there's another one who doesn't. You know, like in Australia, we wanted to bring over Vyasaki, Madhava, Gauravani, Mayapuris. And it's like people like, oh, ISKCON this, ISKCON that. I'm like, it's all people. I talk to the temple president, say, hey, how would you like to have a 24-hour kirtan in your temple? You know, it's going to cost this much. And then we got all the money. It was like $12,000 or something. It's all doable.
Yeah.
But if you approach it as like ISKCON's a monolith, it's a thing, it's not made up of people, individuals, then it kind of reacts to you the way you interact with it.
Right.
It's kind of like people who are powerless about the demonic conspiracy in the world, you know? They're like, oh, the government, and they're doing this. And it's like, okay, but what are you going to do? Even you're like, the government, they're evil, they're this, that, and the other thing. It's like, hey, you know what? They have a grant. We can get some money from them, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And you can make an application and you get some money from some particular department in the government. It's like, fine, why not? And at the same time, there is an Asuric global conspiracy. It's just real. But then you see that you've got to start thinking about it as the fact that I'm also part of the counter conspiracy. And then you realize that you're a person and you have agency, and that you're not the same as everyone else who's participating in the Daivic counter conspiracy on the planet, the divine counter conspiracy. And so then you can start to interact with that's how they're taking control of the governments, by understanding that they're not homogenous and interacting with different parts and breaking it down and dividing and conquering.
Yeah.
So same thing with ISKCON.
Unfortunately.
I'm interested in this part here, 60% growth of carbon crops. First of all, I thought carbon was bad, right? Isn't zero carbon the goal? Obviously not. 60% growth of carbon crops. two questions about that.
Mhm.
What are carbon crops? Like, what are we growing?
It says anything like you can chop and mix with the cow's manure. So
Well, not anything that you can chop, but you chop those carbon crops and then mix them with the manure. We can Google that. We'll ask them later.
yeah,
Or if anyone knows in the chat, drop it in there. Google that, carbon crops.
hmm
And then the carbon must come out of the ground, right? Because actually the carbon can come out of the air. So these must be crops that take the carbon, or maybe you are
we
right.
speculated.
Yeah. Oh, that's okay. I was thinking we're grappling with it with our intelligence. Maybe carbon crops means, any kind of crops that pull the carbon out of the air and bond it into their cells, and then you just chop them down
hmm
and then mulch them or stick them in the compost or whatever.
Yeah. Well, let's investigate that.
Yeah.
Not much into the agriculture part of it, because now they're saying, we need to cut our carbon output and so and so. It's like, okay. So I imagine this is a carbon consuming or plants or the
it's a code word for culling the humans. I mean, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but like the carbon, reduce the carbon life forms. I mean, it's exactly what you would expect some sentient AI created by the demons to say, right? And to program the humans to do.
So what was the other part that I like the way he put everything, like there's always a mission and a vision for what you're doing. And then for Vishnu Prema Pali, it's basically, we're going to create our own home, the garden to become self-sustainable. We have the cows for not only for my manure, but also for the milk. And we have like the other people to live there, to be helpful in the garden. And and then I do service as well. This is a service because the idea of you that that also aligns with mine is like, our cows can be kind of like a therapy for other people. People come here, do some therapy with the cows, and have some kind of time in Vishnu Prema, experience what is food or prasadam. Be with the animals. If they want to come and stay there, they can stay there and associate with other devotees. There is a life going on there. So that is the plan. That's what I thought always. This is a place where people can say, this is a home. I want to be here, or I want to visit this place, or I want to support this place. Like a recharging place for them, a home for them. The experience, this is a home for me. I want to go there. I want to stay there. I want to help there. So that is the idea for Vishnu Prema. Because at the end of the day, this is called Vishnu's
Village of Love.
Village of Love. For a reason that name is there. It's a place where I go. It's like, oh my gosh, this is a home for me where I feel peaceful, and I have the association of devotees. I have kirtan, I have food, I have the garden, I have the animals, and I have a vision for my life, just by being there, by associating with devotees there.
And then, the one thing that is missing that makes the difference in doing, what he was describing. I mean, that map of India was awesome. That's so cool.
I think that's very important, because we need to understand how people likes to be treated.
Yeah.
Like if they ask you, where are you from? I'm from New Zealand. You start explaining about your home country, and you feel alive because someone has an interest about me and they want to hear about me. It's like, let me tell you more about that. I think it's and the cooking thing, I think that's what the part as well, like a cafe, Krishna cafe, or
I'm not into that.
You don't have to be into
the reason for that is like, honey, that's another thing that's a full-time occupation. Farming's already full-time.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you're going to do it.
Okay.
So the cooking, doing cooking classes where you are filmed to go to your garden, pick up your vegetables, and do your cooking from scratch in a place that is like so rustic, and explain the whole philosophy, the connection with the land. That will have more impact with people, because many people have these cooking classes like, okay, you have this and you have that, you chop this, you chop that, and you put this and you put that. But where is actually where you go to your garden, pick up your vegetables, explain a little bit about like, okay, this crop comes, is more wintertime crops, and this is what you can do with this, and so on. So it's like, crop. Wow, I can actually do that. So it's inspiring for people that they don't know where the food come from. And the experience they have, like, I want to do that, Yeah. So there's a lot of projects here.
But the most basic thing is toilets. This is the thing I never thought of before. It's like, you have people come out and then they want to see the cows, and then you want to have a map of India. You have to have a building to be able to pull that off.
It's doable. It's doable.
Sure. But yeah, this is like a basic thing. Toilets. People come to visit. If you have visitors, you need to have toilets for them. Yeah. I mean, we don't have, are we going to, depending on how many visitors you have, the composting toilets, because composting toilets require education in how to use them. And then, if you have mishaps, we have those urine separators, right? I think there's one. Is there one in there? And show people live on the show. Urine separator.
I think all of those.
That's a whole Instagram reel.
Yeah, but this is something doable.
Yeah.
You don't have to do an experiment to see like whether it works or not. This is like, this already has been done. Other people is doing it. So it's just adding to that. Oh, it's Prabhu.
Oh no, I don't think he's coming back. For whatever reason, internet's out down where he is, or whatever, ran out of energy. Who can say?
Oopsies.
No, that's fine. That was a great amount of content.
It was, yeah. It's incredible, especially for someone that actually done it. Fully immersed in that.
Yeah, getting other people involved in it. It's like, yeah, it requires a commitment to the land, to going there and being there, and then a commitment to, okay, we're doing this and we're going to discover what it takes to do it, and it will take however long it takes,
Yeah. Krishna knows, like he had this experience of like, I was doing this and supplying to the temple, but I have to deal every 3 weeks with a new manager or with new cooking helper.
And they didn't take most of the project he was making.
So support wasn't there. And then what happened? Krishna himself guided him, what about you do that one? And then he was completely successful, people were more engaging with him, and he was creating a network with other people. And then things were happening from that. Krishna consciousness doesn't necessarily have to be just only devotees, you see, because there are many people out there that are looking for this, and through that they will have the experience like, I deal with this person, I have the most incredible relationship, It's kind of inspiring for me to associate with these people. And then through that they can experience love of God, what we're doing for them and how we applying that love. And that's what I think, Krishna will supply anything that we need. Yeah, I have no doubt about that. I have full conviction that Krishna will be there. You see, not long ago, we didn't have any plans about the podcast. And then suddenly something was like, hey, let's do this. And then, yeah. And guess what? It's taking us to different angles and discussions with different people. And through that, we're going to discover more things, network, and many people will be, eager to do what we're doing, eager to help for the project.
Yeah, success means to be good at what you do and for other people to know about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, those two things together. Propaganda is the essence. But of course, you also need to have the product. But those two things, if you have product without propaganda, well, what is the use of that? If you have propaganda without product, well, eventually that will collapse. So those two things together, product and propaganda. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I had a cool intro video with the countdown, but I haven't got the outro video ready to roll yet. For next week, we'll have that in there. I've just about got it ready to go. I just finished that countdown video just before we started. thanks to Tapapunja Prabhu for coming on the show this week. And thanks to each and every one of you who have taken the time to view this today. Please continue to leave your comments. We check the comments afterwards and we'll reply to them. Feel free to tag in your friends on Facebook so that they see about it. Even if you're watching this in the archives afterwards, you can share it to someone who'd benefit from seeing this by tagging them in the post. Any last words you want to say?
Tune in for the next episode.
Yeah. We've got some great episodes coming up. Okay, we'll be back same time, same place next week. Param Vijayate Sri Krishna Sankirtanam, total world victory of Hare Krishna.
Victoria Universal de Hare Krishna. Haribol.